Hey, good evening, everyone. It's a nice sunny afternoon here today. David's sitting at, it's pretty sunny it's mixed weather for him today. Let me get right to introducing David to you. David graduated from Leeds University in UK with an honors degree in animal nutrition and physiology. He's been working in the pet food industry for the last 30 years. And he was the chairman of the additive committee for the UK Pet Food Manufacturers Association in the past, and he's been associated with Arden Grange as a brand since pretty much the time Arden Grange came into existence, which was 21 years ago. And I think for 20 years, David's been with Arden Grange as well. David runs a consulting company called Southey's Consulting, which specializes in formulating and designing pet food for manufacturers and brands across the world. They service about 140 clients across 32 countries around the world. So I would think that David would be the best guy that we could have on a conversation such as this today. Thank you so much for coming on this show, David, and
pleasure.
We look forward to the conversation with you.
Great. Thank you very much, Cherian. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah. So for everyone who's watching us today, we're going to be speaking about nutrition around puppies. So weaning puppy diets and the whole life cycle of a puppy growing up, and how much time do you really have in your hands to give it the best, to get the best out of a puppy and to help the puppy develop to its full potential. This is the discussion going to be around today. So we would be discussing small breeds, medium breeds, and large breeds, and specifically some topics around large breeds and issues around large breeds. Thank you so much for joining us, viewers. It would be lovely if you can share it and tell your friends about this show. There will be a lot on weaning puppy diets and supplements and the need not to have supplements as well. So David also worked with a company in Germany where he specialized in designing vitamins.
Yep.
What was it? Yeah. So I was not getting the exact term. So guys, we are jumping straight into our conversation today. Let's start with, what should your dog look like as an adult? This is something that is really important for you to know. David, could you say why do you think it is important for someone to realize or to know how their puppy should grow up to be like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think it is a vital aspect, really, of looking after your puppy. If you get the opportunity if you're buying it from a breeder to actually see what the parents are like, that's probably the best indication you can get of what your puppy may grow into. But it's important because you need to know along the whole growth cycle of your puppy, whether it's getting too large, too small, what it should eventually look like when it reaches maturity. So if you haven't got access to the breeders, then have a look online. There's some really good online information about different sizes for the adults. And also there's a really good guides as to how to assess the size of your puppy. Because puppies can look quite chubby, they can look quite sort of, a lot of hair, but they may not be quite as big and plump as they look. So it's important to actually get your hands in there, feel the puppy, and to assess it the whole way through. It's really important.
Okay, so the puppies develop at various stages in various ways. At some point in time, they can grow up to be scrawny and lanky and everything else, and then a couple of months later, they put on some weight. Or probably early on in their life, they're chunky, nice, round puppies, and then they start losing weight. So, could you explain, maybe from a German Shepherd perspective or a Cocker Spaniel perspective, or from both, for our viewers, how that could be?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the two interesting breeds there because they are very different, and as you say, they do grow up in very different ways. I've got Cocker Spaniels, so I've obviously seen it firsthand. But I mean, Cockers can look quite chunky when they're young, and the sort of temptation is to maybe reduce what you're feeding or to change what you're feeding. But it's quite natural. It's quite natural for them to be a little bit chunky. Again, have a look online. Have a look at weight charts as to what your puppy should weigh. It's always a good idea to try and weigh your puppy as well through its growth. Whereas, German Shepherds, they tend to be leaner, but don't get them too lean. I mean, it's if anything, your puppy should be slightly on the heavier side, because it will catch up. It will actually use that energy and convert it into muscle and bone later. So if in doubt, just err on the side of caution, and be slightly over rather than under, I would say, on the weight growth.
Okay. So while we are at this point in time, we could possibly take the various developmental stages in a puppy, from the time they're born to maybe they have all different maturity periods depending on the size of the breed they're in. Could you take us quickly through some of those stages?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one really incredible thing about dogs is the rate at which they develop. I mean, if you compare it to a human, really, we're growing for about 20% of our lifespan. So it takes that long for us to reach adulthood. Whereas with a dog, it can be less than 10%, and even less than 5% of their life is spent growing. And that kind of goes back to evolution, because if you think about a dog in the wild, when it was running with a pack, it has to grow up very quickly. It's got to move with the pack very quickly. So with small breeds, they can reach maturity maybe in 6 months, whereas obviously with the larger breeds and the giant breeds, it can be just over a year. But that still represents a very small part of its life, really. So it's important to really focus on that.
So does that really mean that, that initial period is the time where you have to really put in everything to make sure that they can grow to their full potential?
Absolutely, absolutely. The first 50% of the growth of a puppy is the critical period in life. If you make errors at this stage, it's quite possible that you'll carry those errors right through the dog's life. Because what's happening during the first 50% is things like the brain's developing, the internal organs like the heart, the nervous system, the digestive system. All of these really vital functions are developing. And if you think about a Cocker Spaniel, for example, that period is only about 3 months long. So, you've got to get it right in that early stage. So what I always say is that if you're going to spend good money on a good pet food, do it at that period. Make sure that the first 50% of its growth, you spend as much as you can possibly afford, really, on the development then.
So the picture that I have on the screen, it really is a large breed dog. So it's a Rottweiler, puppy that we're seeing at different stages of its growth. So I think the puppy goes through this stage, and pretty much by 12 months of age, this is right from left to right. He's gone through all the phases, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So in case if you miss out on the initial phase, do you think you can really catch up later on after they come to maturity?
It's difficult.
It is difficult.
Yeah. It becomes more difficult, but the more deficient or the more excess actually that you feed during that very initial phase, the harder it is really to catch up through the dog's life. Yeah.
Okay, because whether it is. And here I have a picture of a Yorkshire Terrier, right from when the puppy was born all the way to its maturity. And this, from the discussions that we had, and I think this would be the right stage for me to talk about the different ages of maturity for the puppy. So if you could just quickly take us through this chart, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a chart I put together just to demonstrate really the different growth curves for the different breeds. So if you look on the left-hand side, the blue line, that's a toy breed. Typical growth curve for a toy breed. So you can see, if you look up the left-hand side, that's the percentage of its adult maturity. So reaches 100% after around 5 months of age. And if we contrast that on the right-hand side, the farthest right line, that's a giant breed, like a Great Dane. Now that may reach adult maturity at maybe 12, 13 months. But the thing to really point out is if you look at these smaller breeds, see how steep that first part of the curve is. It's almost vertical. It's growing really rapidly. And that's where you've got to get the nutrition absolutely right.
Yeah. So which is where I was, thinking while we were planning for this session, that you really have very little time in your hand when you get a puppy to make sure that it can develop to its full potential. And there is really no scope for trial and error there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a Cocker Spaniel, and for that matter, any breed, a toy breed, by the time you get the puppy from the breeders, it's, I think, on a, full steam growth phase where you just have a couple, maybe 2 months or 3 months at the most, for it to reach 100% physical maturity, whereas a Cocker Spaniel could go all the way up to 9-10 months, just typically when I see them achieving their full adult size. I think about 9-10 months Cockers are at the full size. So can we now further break down this 0 to 100% development into phases? And could you tell us, what happens in the first phase of weaning to 50% growth, and then the next level, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, as I say, during that first 50%, so until they reach about half of their adult weight, there's a lot of internal organs and a lot of internal tissues that are developing. So you may not see it so much on the outside. Your puppy may not be putting on a lot of obvious weight, but inside there's an awful lot going on. So that's the time, as I say, when things like the immune system is developing, the digestive system is developing, the brain, of course, is as well. So by about 50% of its age or its adult weight, most of those things are formed. Now, beyond there, when you get to 50 to 80.
Okay, but typically for a medium-sized breed, what would be this 50% growth milestone in age be like? So are we talking of, as per this chart, let's say Cocker is at that 50% at around 4 months of age?
Yeah, just under 4 months, I would say, something like 14 to 16 weeks. Yeah.
Okay. And what happens from that 50% to 80% growth rate? I think we kind of made these, different phases. So during the 50 to 80%, what are the developments that are happening, and what is critical at that point in time?
Well, this is the period really where the dog is really starting to put on some weight. So the bones are lengthening and they're strengthening as well. And the dog is building muscle as well. So this is really where the weight's starting to come on.
Right.
So at this point, really, nutrition is focused on balance, really. Sufficient energy, sufficient protein to try and support all this growth that's happening.
Right. And then we have the 80 to 100% growth rate.
Yeah. So final 20% of growth. This is kind of a period where the dog's learning a lot. Normally it's where it's exposed to the environment a bit more, maybe some other dogs, it's interacting a bit more. So it's learning a lot. Brain is very active. Also, it's exposed to a lot of external influences. So things like its immune system is really important. But it's done most of its growing by this stage.
Okay. So, we kind of are establishing here that the early stage nutritional requirements are very special, and that is the time when we put in all our focus and energy and effort into the right kind of food. And we are not touching upon exercises needed this time. We'll just focus on nutrition during this conversation, and we probably would take on in another session for the benefit of everyone who's watching us, the parallel exercise routines and regimens that you can follow. But, there is an argument, David, that I keep hearing from a lot of people that, the pet dogs are very similar to the wild dogs. And there's always this comparison to, if they were in the wild, this could have been what they would have been eating, and this could have been how it could have gone, and so on and so forth. So what is your, point on pet dogs being similar to wild dogs?
Yeah, it is an argument I hear a lot as well. I mean, to be honest, dogs have evolved dramatically from wild dogs. Our domestic dogs in our house are very, very different. Physiologically, they've changed. Genetically, they've developed a lot. We've been around dogs, or dogs have been around us for about 20,000 years now. So they've been eating what we've been eating, the scraps that we've been giving them for about 20,000 years. So they have developed a lot. They can now eat what we eat. They can eat carbohydrates. They can utilize them perfectly well. So I think trying to compare them with a typical wild dog is very flawed, I would say.
Okay. So what is this, now that you mentioned carbohydrates, and that you said that, they've gotten used to eating carbohydrates, and there are some of the brands that I hear in the market, at a point in time, I used to hear it all the time saying grain-free diet. And does that really mean free of carbohydrates, or what does that really mean? And is that really important?
No, grain-free diets are still contain carbohydrate, but they contain alternatives to typical grains like rice. So they will contain things like potato, perhaps.
Potatoes, right?
Yeah, or
So what
peas and
difference
beans.
does it really make?
Sorry, say again?
What difference does it really make? Does it make a difference?
I would say no. From a nutritional point of view, carbohydrate is carbohydrate. The dog will utilize it in the same way.
Okay.
You can have some dogs that are sensitive to grains, and then maybe it's sensible to use a grain-free diet, but the vast majority of dogs can cope perfectly well with grain.
All right. So we will come into maybe allergies and what could possibly cause allergies to some of the dogs, etc., much later. But I think one of the first things that we need to establish is the need for right kind of food and what is balanced nutrition for our food. So now, before we move on further, what did change physiologically over the years? And these last 20,000 years, what did we change in the dogs? And are these dogs now breed to breed? There are some of the brands that I see that there is a food for Cocker Spaniels, there is a food for Labradors, there is a food for German Shepherds. What is really the difference between these kind of foods?
Well, for most breeds of dog, there need be no difference. Most breeds of dog can cope perfectly well on the same recipe, same diet.
Okay.
It's one of the incredible things for dogs. If you think about the difference between, let's say, a Pekingese and a Great Dane, you would think nutritionally they would require something vastly different, but actually they can cook perfectly well on the same food. Okay.
So, I mean, that would be true in case of adult dogs. Is that any different in case of puppies of of the same two breeds, a Pekingese and a Great Dane puppies? Would they need different kind of foods?
Not necessarily, no. What you do need to take care of, though, is with the larger breeds. If you keep the larger breeds on a like a young puppy diet, like puppy weaner diet, for too long, they can start to put on too much body mass. So muscles and bones will, they won't develop at the correct rate. So you can have joint problems and perhaps skeletal problems with the larger breeds. But nutritionally, the requirements are very similar.
Okay, because I was comparing labels behind the food brand food bag for large puppy and for medium puppy. It both gave me the same numbers for protein and fat and everything else. And I could only physically see that the kibble size was different, but nothing more than that.
Yeah, exactly.
So is that okay? So I think that's one of the myths, and all of us have been watching it all over the place. We've been seeing it at all the pet stores. We have so many SKUs of products to choose from, and we see this breed and that breed and this breed and that breed, and So I think this was a good point to make. Now, another place where I want to get to is about dogs wanting to eat a variety of food. Or how does dogs perceive food as? For me, food can be entertainment. For me, food can be socializing. For me, food can be anything, right? That's where you make friends around food. You build your family around food, and you have all of that happening. But when it comes to dogs, how does that really, what function does food play for a dog?
Well, to be honest, dogs view their food as very much functional. It is it's not entertainment for them. They don't find variety in their diet as being stimulating.
Okay.
And it's really us. It's the humans that are, if you like, humanizing the dogs. As pet parents, we like to think they like what we like, but actually a dog is only thinking, I need to get that food from the bowl into my stomach as quickly as I can. It's a function.
Okay. So does that help to keep it at that? Or what happens when you humanize your dog a lot more and start thinking that, I would think my dog needs a lot of variety of food, and let me give him fish today and mutton on Tuesdays and chicken on Thursdays and something else on Fridays. So does that really matter, or does it really help? And does that make a dog a fussy eater?
Potentially it can. Yeah, absolutely. I think really a dog's, particularly its digestive system, really is used to the same ingredients, the same nutrients every day, and that's what it really wants. When you start varying its diet, it puts more stress, if you like, on the digestive system, so you're more likely to have problems. But also, you can create a fussy dog, because what the dog will actually do is it will find something it likes, and if you keep changing the diet, it thinks, well, I'll wait till that food comes around again. I don't want that. I'll wait for the one I really like. Whereas really,
he would wait for the Thursday's duck for the rest of the week. Is that so?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's probably something I have experienced in my past. I have a dear friend of mine, Nina, who said, just give this to your dog. If he doesn't eat it, he loses it for the day. Give it back to him the next day till he starts eating, and that's all that he gets to eat.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes a difference. And I think most of my dogs eat well because of that, because they know that they have a 2-minute window to eat their food. And then if they don't, and if they fool around, sniff around here and there, and that food is gone. So is that typically how you would recommend feeding the dog? Apart from what you're feeding, would you tell us about how should we be feeding? Should I make food available all the time, or should it be just, at the meal times?
Yeah, no, dogs should be really ready for their food. They should be really eager to eat when you provide the food. If you think again back to how dogs have evolved, I mean, dogs are opportunist feeders. In the wild, a pack will come across something that it can eat. It's normally the cats that will kill the prey, and then the dogs will come behind. So they may only find a meal every 2-3 days. And that instinctively is how a dog should eat. It should be really keen to eat its food, almost gorge on its food, and then rest. So if your dog
I tell all my puppy owners that your dog should be gorging on that food. They should just gobble it all up in one go and just finish the food quick. And that's how I see it. And then I start seeing these special feeder bowls, which are typically meant to slow down your dog and so on and so forth. And those could be exceptional cases, maybe when you would need it. But I typically feel, and especially with the weather in India, it's already hot. Dogs find it very difficult to probably find interest in their food, and then the palatability and all of those things around. So we will come back to, soaking the food and everything at the later part of today's conversation. But let me just summarize what we've done so far for people who've joined us right now. So we were discussing how important and how short a period you have while you raise your puppy to make sure that the puppy develops to its full potential. We have a chart that was put up here. So this chart kind of shows you how many months, or so the axis below is age in months, and the left side you have the physical maturity. So what David was telling us was how fast different breeds of dogs, depending on their size, achieve their 100% physical maturity. So for a toy breed, it takes as little as 5 months. For a medium-sized breed, it takes maybe about 10 months for a Cocker, and 11 to 12 months for a German Shepherd, and maybe 13 to 14 months for a Great Dane. And this is all that we have to kind of achieve the best that we can get out of our dogs to get them to their full physical potential. So it's really, really important for you to make sure that you have the right food in place at the time when your puppies are growing up and when you have your puppies on hand. So moving on forward, we also established that dogs get to be fussy eaters if you start giving them a variety of food, and it kind of may place a certain amount of pressure on their digestive system and their processing when you give them varieties. And we definitely don't want our dogs to wait for the Thursday ducks. So it's the same food every day, no exception. So let's get back to a very interesting topic here: human baby formula versus puppy food. So I come across, David, a lot of times people recommending to feed baby formula for puppies. And by baby formula, I mean human baby formula and not puppy baby formulas. So what do you have to say about that? And especially in light of the conversation we had about the quick development in puppies, the early stage of development.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You can cause an awful lot of problems by feeding human foods generally to puppies, but particularly with the baby formulas. Human baby formulas are, again, very concentrated in nutrients, but they're not necessarily the correct nutrients for your puppy. The nutrient requirements of puppies differs an awful lot. And going back to what we said, comparing humans with puppies and the rate of development, as I say, humans will spend 20% of their life developing. So it's quite slow, whereas with a puppy, it can be as little as 5 to 10% of its life. So their requirements are very different.
Okay. So before we go further, we're getting a whole bunch of questions from our viewers today. I would be putting up the questions up for us to answer for them. So everyone who's asked me questions, Deepak Narayanaswamy, Hosanna, Sandeep, Saba, everyone. Just give us 2 more minutes. Let's just get through to a couple of points, and we would come back to every single question that you have asked. So let's just go through these very critical points, which will tell us the basics about dog food and puppy formula and the growth patterns and what is good and what is essential. And I think this discussion, when I take weaning puppy, it's always about what's essential. It's not even, okay, what is good or what is convenient. It is more to essential service, because that critical time frame that you have just to work with that puppy, or 5 months or 6 months to get it to the full potential. So guys, we're coming back to your questions. Let us just get through with these questions on the puppy formula and everything else. So we've gone through, established this, that we don't need to feel guilty that we don't offer variety to our puppies. That's very clearly established. So now let us talk about what are, every dog food, every puppy food, says David, optimal levels of nutrients. So what could those specifically be, and how different is that from human diet?
Okay. Well, we know that all dogs require around 42 essential nutrients in their diet. Some of those nutrients it can store. So maybe it doesn't need it on an absolute daily basis, but most of them actually do need replenishing pretty much daily. So when we talk about optimal nutrition, we're talking about providing those nutrients in the correct quantities, not too little, not too much either, because that can be obviously a problem. But also nutrition is nearly always about balance. It's not about how much is present in the diet. It's about how nutrients are balanced against each other. So optimal nutrition takes account of requirement, but also the total balance in the food.
Okay. So here's a statement, a question from Sharad Sharma. He's asked, when I started keeping pedigreed dogs, the formula in use was the 3 Bs, belly, bowel, and bone, as a guideline to proper nutrition. Is it still the basis of nutrition formula in use now? I think this is a fantastic piece. 3 Bs, very easy to remember.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, yeah. I think that's great. I haven't heard of that before, but it's great. Yeah, I like that.
This is a very fantastic way to put it forward, isn't it?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, very succinct, and it's correct. Yeah, absolutely.
You can avoid the poop word and everything else, and you can say that anywhere, while even at the dinner table, and say, okay, how's the belly, bowel, and bone?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Sharad Sharma is an international FCA judge and is also a cocker enthusiast as well. And he breeds boxers, and he had Irish setters in the past and everything. So he's really a guiding figure for all of us here, and we always look up to him on this. So we would get back to. So do you want to elaborate anything on this belly, bowel, and bone? So could you just elaborate further for our viewers, what would we mean really by belly? And I think the indication there is the size of the dog.
Yeah.
Or how thin the dog is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think I would say that's really looking at the 3 very key points of the puppy's development. So belly, size of the dog. And I go back to feeling your dog, and not just looking at the shape of your dog, but actually get your hands on, so you can feel how its belly is and how its body's developing. Bowels, of course, as you say, we talk about the poop quite regularly, and that's a great indication as to how it's doing. And the bone structure as well. Feel down the legs, and have a look at the gait of your dog, how it's walking, whether it's comfortable or whether it's looking a little uncomfortable with its walk. So I think there are 3 things that are quite easy to check with your puppy. And they're essential things as well as they're developing.
Okay, so we'll go on to the next question. This might be a bit hard to read, but what's written here is that the 9-year-old lab has got a chronic kidney disease, and he started eating an immense amount of mud from the garden. He's on calcium and multivitamins, and his diet has been made by a clinical dog. I'm assuming, but the mud eating is still there. I don't know whom else to ask and what to do. Please, can you guide? So there's a 9-year-old dog who's being supplemented by calcium and multivitamins, and the dog is eating a lot of mud. So maybe you can start with calcium and multivitamins, and we will get into details of that at the later part of our conversation. But should that be necessary, and what should be the guiding factor to decide whether they should be supplemented calcium or not?
Yeah. Okay. Well, firstly, I'm sorry to hear about that. It's yeah, it's distressing. Yeah, and mud eating is normally it's not an indication of any nutritional issue. Normally, it's a behavioural thing that's occurring. It's a secondary response to something else. I think what you have got to be very careful about is over supplementing. I mean, it's a natural instinct to give your dog more. If your dog has got a problem, you just think giving more has got to be a good thing. But in nutrition, quite often that can be more of a problem. And calcium is a typical example. It's a really good example. We quite frequently supplement with calcium because we think adding more calcium, it's going to help bones, it's going to help joints. But quite commonly, it actually does the reverse. In fact, all animals have a very strange condition, really. It's through evolution, actually. When we add calcium to our diet, what the body actually does is it starts to dissolve bone, because the body continually tries to keep a balance between calcium and phosphorus in the blood. So if you're adding more calcium to the diet, the body thinks, okay, I need some phosphorus to balance that. The main source of phosphorus is bone. So it will start to actually break down bone to maintain that calcium phosphorus balance. So more is not always good. So
in a way, when we believe that the calcium that I pour into the dog goes straight onto the bone, what you're saying is that the body will actually take the bone away and break it down into the phosphorus for the calcium to maintain the balance.
Absolutely. And it's a little bit of a chain reaction. It's a bit of a flaw that we have in all bodies, actually. All mammals have this. Because the bone is broken down to produce the phosphorus. But of course, in bone, we have calcium. So the body generates more phosphorus into the blood, but it also generates more calcium into the blood. So it's a cycle. So you can cause a lot of problems by over supplementing with calcium.
But have you really seen real circumstances under which dogs might require calcium supplementation? Because that seems to be the most widely used supplement in India, at least. And I think globally it is glucosamine. But in India, I think calcium seems to be the solution for all the problems. So,
yeah, it's very, very rare, I would say, that a dog requires extra calcium. If it's being fed a complete balanced diet, there'll be more than sufficient calcium present. And it should be in balance with other nutrients as well. The only exception I would say to that sometimes is when you have a lactating bitch where she's producing a lot of milk, then perhaps there's a need there for more calcium in the diet. But generally, and particularly with puppies, it's very, very rare.
And I would think calcium should be one of the easiest to deliver as well, right? Through food?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you have a diet that is based on meat, most of that calcium will come from animal bone, and that is the most available source of bone, a source of calcium that you can find. So yeah.
So we have another question. What is your take on adding supplements during the puppy development stages? This got to be our most popular question. So I think you should go for it. Yeah.
Well, I'm probably repeating myself, but yeah, you've just got to take care. If you're feeding a good quality, balanced and nutritionally complete puppy food, you really don't need to supplement. And as I say, it's our natural instinct. It's almost like our sort of mothering instinct is to give more vitamins, more minerals. We think we're actually doing good. We could be easily doing the reverse and actually causing more harm. So what I would say is stop the vitamins unless you're told to do so by your vet, if your dog has a particular condition, and maybe spend that money on a good dog food.
On a good dog food, yeah. But I think that's also a point where I need to add that, a lot of times people offer this free advice of, okay, get this vitamin, get that multivitamin, etc. Do you think there should be some sort of investigation to be done to ensure that that is really the need of the hour? Or can you just physically examine a dog and say that, oh, this dog seems to be missing some phosphorus and that little zinc is missing? Or, can you really say that?
No, it's very difficult. I mean, even for myself as a nutritionist, it's very, very difficult. Really, you need to involve a vet. It may need blood samples, it may need biopsies. If there's a particular problem, normally you can't diagnose that just by looking. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think we will get one more of the question, a question, and then move on to our discussion. So is it their digestive system anatomy or the area they originally belong to, which is responsible for different food for different breeds? So physiologically, how different are these dogs, and does the area or country of origin make any difference?
Well, to answer the second point first, does the country of origin make any difference? No, it doesn't to their nutrition. No. There are some environmental factors that may mean you have to treat it slightly differently, but we'll maybe come on to that.
Right.
But in terms of breeds, going back to what I said earlier, most breeds, and I would say 80% of the breeds that we will have in our homes, their nutritional requirements are very, very similar. Very similar.
Uh-huh.
There are some exceptions. Some of the more ancient breeds, like maybe Malamutes and Akitas, they don't seem to have evolved in the same way, to the same extent. So maybe there's some arguments for having breed-specific diets for some of these breeds. But I would say most common breeds like Terriers, Spaniels, Retrievers, their nutritional requirements are very similar. Very.
Okay. So I would say the common breeds that we see around, the popular breeds, most of them, of course, now Malamutes and Akitas are becoming more popular. But for the rest of them, that you really don't see a difference why they should be fed different kind of diets. Is that?
No, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, the quantities are different, but no, the nutrition is very similar.
Okay. So there is a question on, there is a conception that kibbles contain a lot of preservatives and are not safe in the long run, and that dogs should always be fed fresh meat. What's your view on this?
Okay.
Preservatives and fresh meat.
Yeah. Well, in terms of preservation, yes, some pet foods will contain preservatives. What I would say is some of the higher quality foods tend to contain less, or some not at all. So I would check the pack really to see what's in there. But what I would also add is that really all preservatives should be safe preservatives. They've got to go through a very strict protocol to ensure that they're safe before they're added. So even those with preservatives should still be safe for your dog. Comparing it with raw meat, well, I would say that feeding raw meat, it's not a balanced diet. You need to balance the raw meat with something else. And potentially, I think you could have more problems trying to balance that correctly than feeding a food with a safe preservative.
Okay. All right. And let's go to an interesting picture that I have here. This is probably a common sight with a lot of pet dogs around. And it could be referred to as east-west pasterns, or technically a splayed leg. What do you think really causes this, and what is the potential solution to this? A typical approach for people would be that it would be looked upon and said that feed your dog a little more calcium and that will straighten up. So is this really an issue of bones, or is it anything else? Can we hear your view on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say, looking at that, it's very little to do with bones and possibly more to do with the joints.
Okay.
Really, to have a bone deformation that extreme, nutrition would have to be badly wrong. And I would doubt that very much. I would say that the best treatment you could have there would be to try and strengthen the joints. And you could use things like maybe glucosamine, chondroitin supplements would help, maybe. Things like vitamin C, vitamin D.
Okay.
Just to strengthen the joints. But I would say certainly adding calcium to try and strengthen bones, I don't think that's the correct approach for that.
Let me ask you this very clearly. Is there any role for calcium in this situation?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it, does it, from what I've said? I would say that no, it's very rare that calcium really will correct a bone problem.
Okay.
There really needs to be something else wrong for a calcium supplement to be needed. So,
okay.
No.
So I will from here go right back to the 50 to 80% development in that puppy, that stage of the puppy. Is that typically where you would find these kind of issues developing? Would you think so? Is it to do with excessive exercise maybe, and the food and nutrition not matching up to it? Could that be any of the reasons for this?
It could be. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As I said earlier, with larger breeds like German Shepherds, it's important to balance the amount of nutrition with the weight of the dog. which is why it's always good to start with the we use the puppy weaner, Arden Grange puppy weaner, in the first few months of life, because, as I say, everything is developing internally. But when you get into the second stage of development, where the bones are starting to lengthen, then really the nutrition has to come down a notch, because otherwise it's putting on too much weight, and that's putting a lot of stress and strain on the joints. So it's possible with that condition that, you know, getting that wrong could actually exacerbate the problem.
Right. I would add this. This is also a common sight. This could be a German Shepherd puppy. This could be similar issues are seen in Doberman puppies. Similar issues are seen in Labrador puppies or Great Dane puppies. So as you go towards the larger side of the breeds, you find a whole lot of this. And would it be true if I ask that is this a problem that happens between that 50% to 80% time frame of development, and is there anything that needs to be done? Isn't it better to prevent it rather than trying to deal with the situation? And again, no calcium here, I would suppose.
No, absolutely. It's I mean, you would tend to see this sort of condition, like I say, during that 50 to 80% period of growth. However, what you do during the first 50% could help to prevent that sort of condition. So if during that first 50% of growth, you're having good nutrition, so the joints are developing correctly, the balance of the body is correct, then you're more likely to avoid conditions like that in later development.
Okay. So just before we progress further in this conversation, let me just tell everyone that there are a whole lot of questions coming in, and we would definitely come back and answer those questions maybe after the live conversation is done. But we will take as many questions as possible and try and cover ground with the topics that I already wanted David to cover, because it's not easy to get someone like David on a show like this. He's really somebody, I would say, the veteran in the industry. He's been 30 years in this. Right from his beginning of his career, he worked with primates first, and then he moved into animal vitamins and minerals, and then food formulation. So really, really nice to have him over. We will come back to each of your questions, but while we say that, let's continue with what has already been planned. And I'm just showing some common sites that we see with our German Shepherds and large breeds here. So David, to continue with this, considering that we shouldn't be letting these happen, could you tell for our viewers what should be the, in terms of food and that very critical period of the puppyhood of a dog? Could you tell us more?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as we mentioned earlier, the first 50% of the puppy's growth is the critical period. And for larger breeds, that can be between 5 and 6 months, perhaps. So that first part, we've said, is absolutely critical. But with larger breeds, such as the German Shepherds, it's also important to transition to a lower concentrated diet. So things like the Puppy Junior, the Arden Grange Puppy Junior, we have slightly lower energy levels, we have slightly lower protein levels. So it means that the dog doesn't put on too much weight too quickly and put too much stress on the skeleton.
Right.
So I have a question. Transition.
Okay. I have a question from Sharat Sharma. As a nutritionist, do you believe that dry dog food actually puts the dog's canines to work? We are after all talking of canines. So, yeah. And I think plaque is another issue that I would like to discuss, combined with dental hygiene. So I think maybe we can combine it and answer this.
Yeah, absolutely. In my experience, if you feed a good quality dry pet food, it will keep your dog's teeth clean. It's quite often it's other things maybe that the dog will pick up, or that maybe as being fed, that can cause issues. But certainly, I mean, my dogs, they only get dry food. We give them very few snacks and treats, and they have great teeth. So a good dry food should certainly be sufficient to keep the teeth clean.
So right at this point, I would like to clarify this. What if the water is hard? If you have hard water in your place, and if the dogs are drinking hard water, would that then cause deposit of certain minerals around the teeth? Is that a possibility?
I've never found that to be a case. I would say that hard water, high mineral content in the water, that mineral is soluble So I don't think it would actually deposit in the mouth. I think you're probably more likely to have problems if they're drinking a lot and there's a lot of mineral in the water, more digestively than you would with with teeth.
Because these, I'm not so sure how water soluble are these minerals, because when you count the particle count of that water, when you test the water, it could have high particles, and in my experience, it could possibly happen that that can lead to some deposit of minerals around the teeth. And although you can take it off easily, you can scale them well with the regular tools that you have. But maybe that is one of the points that your viewers can keep in mind. And in case if you have this could be something that you can cross-verify. I just wanted to run it through you, David. So,
Sure.
from your experience, we have very different water quality in the various parts of India. So, that could be one of those things. So, okay, I think that we answered this question. We want to now get to some of the questions that breeders might have. And this is, I'm just getting to questions like, in terms of puppies that are being born, and when you're breeding puppies, you could have issues like a swimmer puppy syndrome and other issues which may lead to impaired walking abilities in puppies, right? So could you tell us a little bit about those things? For example, a swimmer puppy syndrome, where a puppy is not really able to walk in its early stages. And there are people I've heard firsthand who say that, excessive amount of animal protein could have led to this. Is that a possibility?
It's very unusual, I would say, to cause a problem like that. You have to have a fairly significant imbalance or deficiency in the diet to cause skeletal problems of that nature. I mean, they do exist, of course.
So let me elaborate on the situation a little bit more. So let's say the bitch that is expecting during pregnancy is being fed on a good quality commercial dog food, and because of the dry, hot conditions in India, it always is typically a practice to kind of top it up with or mix it with cooked meat.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Well.
And
Yep. So, I would say that could potentially get back to this imbalance in the diet. I mean, cooked meat depends what the meat is, of course, but that could be high in calcium, could be high mineral
mostly
content.
chicken with bones.
Yeah. Again, bones. It doesn't necessarily help to just provide more bone and more protein. Again, if you're feeding a good food, really, it's balanced, and any supplementation could be a problem.
To do with the palatability and the heat in this country. So when it gets too hot, dogs typically tend to kind of have some sort of an aversion to dry food, and it is quite normal for as a practice here. You mix it with something and then feed it to them and stuff like that. So I'm saying in case of puppies with a certain kind of swimmer puppy syndrome or some sort of walking disability, what is there a calcium phosphorus imbalance that could happen because of that, and would that pass on to the puppies while the puppies are being raised on weaning food, commercial dog food, good quality commercial dog food? Is that then a possibility?
Well, there's a possibility that if the bitch, when she's lactating and feeding the puppies, if she's not on good nutrition as well, that you're starting your puppy off on a bad sort of footing. So yes, you can start in a bad way with poor nutrition of the bitch, but then normally puppies will catch up quite well. If you're moving them onto a good puppy food, then normally they will catch up. So yeah, normally it's not a problem.
Okay. And now that we've come this far, we've kind of established the quality of food that we should be feeding them. We've discussed supplements, and I would suspect in India we have excessive use of supplements. It just goes without saying for everyone. If they want to show the love, they show it through calcium. they pour in love through calcium syrups. So now that we've kind of gone past that, can we discuss a little bit about how often should the puppies be fed, and your views on soaking the kibbles, and can we hear a bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Soaking the kibbles, certainly it's a good idea when they're very young, just to get them introduced to obviously the dry food. But the other thing that water will do, and I would recommend soaking it with warm water, not any other liquid, it actually activates a lot of the flavor and the aroma in the kibble as well. So, it will entice them to eat more as well. So I think it's a good idea to you can easily turn it into like a puppy porridge. If you leave it to soak in some warm water for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you'll find it's quite easy to actually mix into like a porridge. So that's a great way to start. And it's also a great way if your puppy's off its food as well, is just to add some warm water, because, as I say, it just activates the aroma again. And then obviously once you've moved on to the solid kibble without soaking, then really in terms of feeding, the more the better, really. Feed little and often rather than large meals when they're young. They only have a tiny stomach. If you think of like a small Shih Tzu or something like that, size of its stomach is absolutely tiny. So small meals frequently is the best way to go. And then, of course, as the puppy develops, you can start to reduce the number of meals and increase the quantity.
So even for adult dogs, would you think soaking a little bit would be a good idea?
It's certainly not harmful at all, no. I would say also when in your climate where you have very hot summers, I think the more moisture, the more you can get liquid you can get into your dog, the better. And also when it's hot, we know ourselves, our appetite goes down. So it helps again just to stimulate the hunger with the dog.
Okay. So we will take a quick question here from Preeti. She's asking if there are any lack of certain vitamins and minerals in a dog's diet that could bring out a behavioral change, possibly aggression in dogs. Is there a link there?
I'm not aware of a link with aggression and minerals and vitamins, but certainly behavioral. If there's a severe deficiency or a severe problem, then potentially that can certainly change the behavior. It needs to be quite severe though. But what I would say is again, back to supplementation, you can easily cause as many problems by adding too much as you can too little. So I would be careful. If you think there's a behavioral change, just supplementing with vitamins and minerals isn't always the right answer.
Okay. So we have another question here, and this has got to do a lot with our weather. So during summers, puppies are rejecting all kinds of food. Any suggestions? What can we provide to them? What fruits and vegetables? I think before we give options, I think the first thing would be you start giving options to your puppy. Your puppy is going to be more fussy and more fussier by the day. So I think it's just enough that. What would you say, David? How would you deal with the situation?
Well, I would say that some fruits and vegetables are good potential training aids, but I wouldn't use them as supplements per se to the diet. I would just maybe, peas or pieces of carrot, things like that. I think are great as training aids, but I wouldn't use them as like a major supplement to the diet.
So one of the interesting things I kind of started following since last year is I stopped giving treats to my puppies. I use the same kibble as treats when I train them, because I realized that, and this is again, so I realized that their small stomachs as it is have very little space, and you fill it up with all the treats, then they don't have space for real food. And then you miss out on that real critical nutrition there. So I would think, for the benefit of everyone who's watching, considering how small a duration that you have for your puppies to get to 100% physical maturity, you should use all the space that you have in their stomach for giving them good quality food, which is not a supplement, not a supplemental feed, not a treat, but something that is core to their development. So I think that would be a good way to kind of keep them going, and they will keep eating, and that would make sure that there's enough food inside their system at all times. I think there is a very interesting question we have here from Kamlesh Tripathi. Before we move into this question, David, could you tell us what would be that fruits and vegetables, carrots, and what else would you say?
Well, most fruit and vegetable is okay if it's fresh. I think the things to avoid are things like dried fruits. We know that things like raisins, sultanas can be potentially toxic for dogs.
Okay.
And things like the onion family, not that you would necessarily give that as a supplement, but think about, maybe what's in that. And chocolate, of course, chocolate can be very dangerous for dogs.
Okay, so we'll switch over to the next question. Do we need to change dry food frequently? Which we've already answered in the earlier part of this conversation, that stick to your food. But this is the second part, is what is most interesting for me. Read somewhere that continuing with the same food develops allergies.
Yeah, there's no evidence to show that at all, to be honest.
Because I've been hearing a lot of this recently, you know. So
yeah, no. Scientifically, that's certainly there's no evidence to suggest that you can develop or create an allergy by feeding the same food.
Okay.
There's an increase in incidence of sensitivities to some foods. I would say that's a different thing to an allergy, and quite often those sensitivities are created as a secondary response. Maybe it's the environment or something else that's causing that.
Okay. And I think the last couple of questions, we have a few minutes left. And I think last couple of questions I would ask on behalf of everyone who's here, and I'm sure they're waiting to ask these questions. So one of such questions being, how do I take care of my puppy or ensure that my puppy eats well during summers? They lose a lot of appetite at that time. And, we are big on curd in India. Yogurt and curd is really big for us. So, and it's considered very cooling for us, and we enjoy drinking yogurt and buttermilk and curd and all of that. So it is quite natural for us to suggest that to be fed to the dogs. And there are a lot of vets who suggest giving rice mixed with yogurt for the dogs.
Okay.
So your views on that, please.
Okay. And well, I think I should start by saying that really, if your puppy is not eating, anything you can do to stimulate your puppy to eat is a good thing, really. Obviously, puppy can go downhill very quickly if it's not eating for 1 or 2 days. So I'm not going to say never do it. But of course, I think anything that you give over and above its food is diluting that food to some extent. It's filling it up on something that isn't balanced. So what I would say is that if your puppy really isn't eating and you're concerned, yes, of course, maybe add some curds, maybe add a small amount of yogurt. But as soon as that puppy's back up and eating again, and it's back to its normal self, then try and remove it again. Because, as I say, you're not really helping by adding more.
Okay. So another question there is, sometimes I find issues with palatability. Whatever I give my puppies dry food, they just don't want to go for it. But the minute I add some sort of liver pate to it, they just gobble it up. So, what is it about palatability and adding some of these things? Does that really come in the way? And also eggs, boiled eggs, for example, is considered good. Some people might say that, no, you shouldn't feed too much. And I have also had people tell me that you can feed as many eggs as possible for the dog. So could you put it all together and tell us?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, certainly eggs and liver are very good examples of very palatable ingredients for dogs. We use a lot of egg and a lot of liver as well in the Arden Grange recipes. So we know that it helps. So, and in fact, all the kibbles, all the Arden Grange kibbles are coated with a liver coating. So, so we know that works. Again, I would say take care, really. I think if a small amount helps you to stimulate your puppy's appetite and they eat their food more vigorously, that's fine. But try and keep it to a minimum.
Like very little amount of liver, and that's that much. It's not that much. For this much liver can help me feed a litter of puppies, all of them. About 9 of them can be fed that much mixed into their kibbles, and
that's great. No problem at all with that. I think you just got to take care that more is not always good. So smallest amount that you need, really. And the comment of feed more eggs, I think it's the same with that.
All right. So I have 2 very interesting questions, and those are going to be our last 2 questions for the day. And these are very, very critical. And these are one of the questions that I asked you also. So Dinkar Pratap Singh, we're going to come back to your question. Let me take a question from Rajesh just before that. So Rajesh has this opinion, which he obviously heard from a lot of veterinary doctors who say that if you're feeding dog food regularly, the lifespan of the dog decreases. Is there any fact in that?
No, not at all. Not if you're feeding a good quality food. Absolutely not. No.
David, if you answer in affirmative, people are going to shoot you. So
What else could I say?
So I think this is a question I should more so ask in private, but I don't think there is a fact in it, and I would like to believe David in what he said. So Rajesh, I think you have an answer to that. There is no fact to what somebody is saying, and it's just convenience and a comment that they can make. That's all I would say. Okay, now to the last question, and this is really important, and this is a question right on top of my mind too, because every dog food, every manufacturer, every brand says our dog food is complete and it is balanced and it has got the nutritional charts right at the back of the bag. Some of them have started putting it in the front of the bag. It all looks perfect. How do you differentiate between different dog foods? And, I think we had that discussion a few days ago. So, could you please tell us about it? The quality of ingredients. Yeah.
To be honest, we could probably spend another hour on this topic because it is such an interesting topic. It's a very difficult one. I mean, as a nutritionist, I struggle sometimes if I have two bags side by side. I struggle to say this one is much better than this one because it's not always easy to tell from what's on the bag. A very quick sort of indicator, I would be looking to see the meat ingredients very high up that list. Hopefully the first listed ingredient would be meat product. And I would be looking for good levels of vitamins and minerals, higher levels perhaps than other brands. But I would say it is difficult, and I sympathize with the amount of variety that's out there.
So what do you think that, the quality of dog food would vary depending on the quality of ingredients that they use? We discussed fresh chicken, we discussed chicken meal, we discussed a whole lot of other things. So would that make it, I think what people are missing out here is their understanding of what difference does it really make? And I think we discussed digestibility, we discussed absorption, and so could you tell us a little bit about that? And we will wrap up the session with that, and I will take on with you another day, maybe.
As I say, we could spend a long time discussing that whole issue, but the problem is
you can ask us this question right at the 59th minute. But
exactly. But you can't tell from the packaging, is what I would say. I mean, chicken meal, dried chicken. I've seen many different qualities of dried chicken, as you could possibly imagine, and the digestibility and the nutritional profile of those meals can be dramatically different. But on a package, on a bag of food, it will be listed the same way as chicken meal. So it's not possible really to assess the quality of the ingredients from the packaging. Really, your dog will tell you the quality of the ingredients. That's really the only way to tell, I'm afraid. But generally, you get what you pay for in life, and so if you pay a little bit more, you should expect that the nutrition to be better as well.
Right. I think the answer lies in the poop that you get the next day from your dog.
Absolutely.
So I think David has been absolutely wonderful. This has been a completely unbiased discussion on the dog food, and we've not gone on how good is Arden Grange or how bad is someone else or any of that. I think the idea was to put the facts out for everyone to know, and that yes, this is what it is, and you be wise and choose the right puppy food for your growing puppy. You really don't have a lot of time to do trial and error, so prepare yourself well, do your homework before you bring your puppy home, and make sure you choose the right dog food for you. Reach out to people who knows well, and we have some wonderful brands in this country, and I've been enjoying Arden Grange for a long time, as much as my puppies did. Thank you so much, David, for coming and joining us. Absolutely wonderful having you over. So we might take up this discussion as itself for the next session, maybe. We shall see you soon, and thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye. And everybody, thank you for joining us, and it was wonderful to have you and your questions. If there are some unanswered questions, and I think there is a question from a Dalmatian owner which has not been answered, I will come back to your question, Ajay Rai, at a later time. But till then, thank you so much, and good night, everyone. David, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you.
And bye-bye. Grange and Orange Pet Nutrition. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.